Good morning and welcome to Policy Exchange, ladies and gentlemen. Immigration is one of the relatively few things that we don't actually look at here at Policy Exchange, but it has a huge impact on all things that we do look at, from jobs to growth to public services. And it's also a hugely important issue in the minds of the electorate as well. Now, I've always thought that we talk quite a lot about kind of how many people are coming to the country, but not that much about who, or about how integrated they will be with the rest of the society. So for that reason, it's a particular pleasure to have this opportunity to have Damian come and talk about some of those issues this morning. We're going to start with Damian's speech, and then there's going to be some time for questions and answers from all of you. So without any further ado, it's a huge pleasure to have you here this morning, Damian. Thank you for coming to Policy Exchange. Welcome.
Thank you. And okay, this is not going to work.
Shuffle the thing around whose mic is that now we are at feedback now? Sorry.
Right. Anyway, thank you very much, and thank you all for coming. This is billed as a speech. I have a horrible feeling it merges into a lecture. It'll be for you to judge with the intellectual content that makes it worthy of a lecture, but the length certainly does. So settle down comfortably is all I would say at the upshot. For the past decade, the immigration debate in this country has been mainly about numbers. How many come here and how fast they come here has been the root of widespread political concern and public anxiety. That's why we thought it would take a whole parliament to bring the numbers down to a sustainable basis. And as a result of all the action we are taking, we anticipate net migration will come down to the tens of thousands. By the second anniversary of the general election this May, we will have implemented or announced radical changes in all the main routes of immigration and in the key area of breaking the automatic link between coming here and staying here forever. The first small signs of the beneficial effects of these policies are just beginning to show up, with an 11% fall in student visas and a 17% fall in work visas in the latest quarterly figures compared with a year previously. But there is no quick fix. We know that net migration has consistently been around 150,000 to 200,000 a year since the late 1990s. The recent rise to 252,000 reflects the culmination of the policies of the last government. That's why we thought it would take a whole parliament to bring them down to the tens of thousands on an annual basis. Everything we do is designed to help us reach this goal, while keeping us open to the brightest and the best who will help drive economic growth. We need to raise the whole tone of the immigration debate. Immigration remains one of the 2 or 3 most important issues, and it's frankly absurd that anyone who argues for firmer immigration controls is accused of dog whistling or nastiness. That kind of response may have worked as a political trick 10 years ago, but even those on the left who take a detailed and intelligent interest in immigration matters recognise that the world has moved on. What we need is a national consensus on how we can make immigration work for Britain. We are evidently a long way from such a consensus, but I want to start to build it. Making the immigration numbers sustainable is a necessary condition for a successful immigration policy, but it's not sufficient. What I want to speak about today is another key element in the long-term transformation of British immigration policy, which is the development of the principle of selectivity. We need to know not just that the right numbers of people are coming here, but that the right people are coming here. People who will benefit Britain, not just people who will benefit from Britain. An immigration policy which reflects a consensus about who should be able to come here, and an immigration system that can actually deliver that. A legal framework which reflects the will of Parliament while respecting our international legal obligations. A system and a policy which makes immigration work for Britain economically. And this is absolutely necessary so that immigration policy can contribute to the wider agenda for economic growth. Recently, the Migration Advisory Committee published a fascinating study about how we calculate the costs and benefits of immigration. This is the first authoritative study to look at this complex but absolutely vital calculation in detail. Economists across government will be considering the MAX assessment in detail over the coming weeks. I believe it changes the whole intellectual basis of the immigration debate and deserves far more attention than it gained when it was first published. The MAC focused on three main areas. First, when weighing up costs and benefits, whose welfare should be considered? The resident population or that of the residents plus the new immigrants? Their view is that government should focus on the impact of migration on the welfare of the residents. This would remove the bias in the system, which makes that any increase in immigration is recorded as an increase in overall GDP, national output, and therefore, by definition, a benefit, whereas any cut in migration was a cut in GDP and therefore a negative. Also, the MAC said that more consideration should be given to less tangible but potentially important impacts, such as the positive dynamic effects on productivity which skilled migrants can bring. Second, do immigrants displace British workers in the labour market? The MAC research showed that in certain circumstances there can be a displacement of British-born workers by non-EEA migrants, up to a level of 23 displaced for every 100 additional working-age non-EEA migrants. The MAC suggested that impact assessments should not always assume, as they have done, that if migration is reduced, none of the jobs vacated by migrants will be filled by resident workers. And third, how can less easily quantifiable social impacts, for example, the impact of migration on transport, housing, crime, and the consumption of health and education services, be accounted for? The inadequacy of our present data prevents a simple monetisation of this. However, they should not therefore be ignored in favour of other, more readily measurable factors such as taxes and wages. A qualitative analysis which sets out potential distributional impacts, which are complex and will vary according to local area, gender, income, age group or ethnicity, would improve our assessment. And this analysis, I believe, gives us the basis for a more intelligent debate, and it supports a more selective approach to non-EU migration. The old assumption was that as immigration adds to GDP, national output, it is economically a good thing, and that therefore, logically, the more immigration the better, whatever the social consequences. That was the view of the previous government in its early years, and it still seems to be the view of Tony Blair himself and of some of his former advisors who are now scattered around the think tanks. It's not my view, and it's not the view of the vast majority of the British people. The key insight of the MAC's work is that the measure of a successful immigration policy is how it increases the wealth of the resident population. It's easy to see the opposite in action. In the boom decade before the bust of 2008, the number of people employed in the UK economy increased by 2.9 million. But 1.6 million of those jobs were taken by non-UK nationals. That is emphatically not a sustainable policy. What is sustainable is an approach which brings the numbers down, but at the same time targets those who Britain needs to create a dynamic economy. Those who have the knowledge, the ideas and the skills to make us a more productive place, and therefore a place where it's easier for UK citizens to find jobs. This means developing a system which chooses carefully who we allow to come and who we allow to stay. As I say, the main purpose and effect of the changes we have already introduced is to cut the numbers and bring the system under control. We've been careful to consult before every individual change, to involve the independent MAC, to publish the evidence on which we based our proposals, and indeed to change the details of the proposals in response to the thoughts of others. This has allowed us to pursue both the path of reducing numbers and the necessity to start building a more selective system. And a number of our individual policies illustrate this. We've already made significant changes to the rules governing the admission of skilled workers. Not just the annual limit, but also a higher minimum skills requirement so that occupations such as cooks and care workers are no longer eligible. We made sure that we retain a flexible approach for scientists, researchers, those paying more than £150,000, and intra-company transferees. And we closed the Tier 1 general route, which allowed self-selecting migrants to come without a job offer. And adopting this more selective approach has ensured the system has worked smoothly, with the limit we imposed being significantly undersubscribed. We expect under half the available places to be taken. And this one fact entirely contradicts the notion, which some commentators were fond of a year ago and are still fond of, that the limit is stopping businesses getting key workers from the global talent pool. There is not a shred of evidence for that. For students, our new system ensures that only high-quality, genuine students can come to the UK to study with legitimate education providers. A key flaw in the old system was the lack of regulation of private providers. That's why we've asked the Quality Assurance Agency and the Independent Schools Inspectorate to extend their activities to cover these colleges, and why we required all Tier 4 student sponsors to obtain highly trusted status from the UK Border Agency. The students themselves have to speak better English and progress in their studies if they want to prolong them. And we've curbed those entitlements that were attracting students for the wrong reasons, such as the right to work and the right to bring their families with them. And at the same time, we've made it easier for low-risk students to meet our visa requirements. In the coming weeks, we'll be announcing our conclusions about the settlement and the family consultations that we've conducted. And in these consultations, there were a number of examples of the selectivity I'm talking about. In our consultation on family migration, we've made clear that we welcome those who are in genuine relationships. But there is an important caveat. We want those coming here to be able to integrate fully and to be independent. This means being able to speak English and having sufficient financial means to be able to prosper. We asked the MAC to advise on an appropriate income range for the sponsor's income, which they have suggested should be between £18,600 and £25,700. This will produce a new system for family migration, which is selective in choosing people who are ready and able to take a positive role in the life of their local community and society more widely. Not only will this help us develop a more cohesive and united society, it will be of huge benefit to the individuals who come to settle here from all over the world and who need to feel that they belong here. Importing economic dependency on the state is unacceptable. Bringing people to this country who can play no role in the life of this country is equally unacceptable. It leads to women normally leading isolated lives, cut off from mainstream British life. Furthermore, marriage as an entrance ticket to the UK, rather than as part of a loving relationship, is not acceptable. In our other consultation on employment-related settlement, we propose to break the link between coming to work in the UK and staying on permanently. We will end the assumption that settlement is an option for all those who come to work. Instead, we will accord it to the brightest and best. We took advice from the MAC on how to do this, and they recommended using pay as the most appropriate selection criteria. They suggested a threshold in a salary range of between £31,000 and £49,000 a year. So again, the system will become more selective. Looking ahead, our effort so far has been about cutting out abuse, getting the basics right, and getting the numbers down. That effort will of course continue, but building on this approach, there's now scope to adopt a more selective approach among the pool of legal migrants. For work, it's not just about controlling numbers through a limit. So we've asked the MAC to look at raising further the minimum skill levels we require from those who come here. Britain does not need more migrant middle managers any more than it needs unskilled migrant labour. We do need top-of-the-range professionals, senior executives, technical specialists, entrepreneurs, and exceptional artistic and scientific talent. One of the tasks for the future is shaping the system so that it allows us to be more precisely selective. I've also asked the MAP to review the working of the policies we introduced last year on intra-company transferees. I know this route is fundamental to Britain's ability to attract foreign direct investment, and we need to get it right for our employers. Our approach, based on salary, is far more transparent and far less bureaucratic than that of many of our competitor countries. Employers can rely on it, and I want to keep it that way. At the same time, as a route which sits outside the limit and doesn't require a resident labour market test, I need to be very sure it's not being used to undercut our domestic workers, particularly in sectors where a third-party contracting model is used. So I await the MAP's report with great interest. I want British employers to be able to access the best global talent. At the same time, employers need to do more to address skill shortages rather than simply relying on migration. Some jobs have been on the shortage occupation list since the MAC started to advise us on it 3 years ago. That list is not meant to be static, it's not meant to be permanent. We owe it to British employees, particularly at a time of high unemployment even among graduates, to ensure that migration is not seen as the permanent solution, thereby perpetuating the shortage of British workers in certain sectors rather than alleviating temporary gaps in supply. That's why this whole area is not just about tightening the immigration system, but also about focusing on the skills agenda and the training agenda. Just as we are open to the brightest and best, we will continue to make clear that there needs to be no open route for unskilled workers to come here long term. So, for example, we've announced, having taken advice again from the MAP, that the current transitional restrictions on Romanian and Bulgarian workers will be extended for another 2 years, given the current state of the labour market. And we've consulted about restricting the unskilled overseas domestic worker route for household staff. This coming April will see the introduction of our smarter approach to post-study work. Instead of giving everyone the right to stay for 2 years, whether or not they have a job, we are introducing a system which allows only those with a good graduate level job to stay. Those who are wanted by British employers, not just those who want to stay. And some of this is about imposing restrictions on those we don't really need. The other side of the selectivity coin is to use the migration system to attract those we do really want and need. So now that we've moved away from the old model of mass unselected immigration, we can develop the system further to encourage the brightest and the best to come here. This doesn't mean a return to the old, much abused, self-selecting Tier 1 general route. Rather, it's about the development of new specialist routes. For example, we forged new partnerships with bodies such as the Arts Council and the Royal Society to give them the opportunity to select exceptional talent to come to the UK. The principle of the engagement in the migration system by sectoral bodies is an important one. Already the regulation of migration by sports people is delegated to a large extent to the sports governing bodies who exercise it in a responsible manner. And I hope that the new exceptional talent route will become useful in the future to make Britain the first and most natural port of call for world-class scientific and artistic talent to work and prosper. No one would deny that the Premier League is not open to the best footballers from around the world. And we want to work with representative bodies to bring about the same results in the other fields as well. And let me give you some examples of recent approvals under the exceptional talent route. For the Arts Council has endorsed applications from one of today's leading pianists and from an expert on visual effects, considered to be a pioneer in the field, whose works include many of the recent James Bond films. We've also seen expert scientists using this route. For instance, a Chinese researcher who's made a remarkable contribution to the field of condensed matter physics came to the UK under this route with the endorsement of the Royal Society and is currently a tutorial fellow and university lecturer at one of our leading universities. The Royal Academy of Engineering has also endorsed a number of applications from researchers demonstrating world-class talent and potential. an Algerian chemical engineer who received a prestigious fellowship to develop new biofuels at a leading UK industrial research centre. And I'm keen within this route that we attract not only established experts, but also those who show exceptional promise. The British Academy endorsed an application from a Canadian academic who holds an outstanding record for someone near the beginning of her career, and it's coming to the UK to produce internationally leading research with one of the top research groups in the world. And we're already attracting more investors and entrepreneurs under the much more open and generous arrangements we've created for them. Recent examples include a Russian businessman who's gained fast access to global markets by setting up a parquet manufacturing operation in the UK. It's hoped that his startup operation, based in London and Hertfordshire, and set to employ between 10 and 30 people over the next 3 years, will develop to become the international hub of the established Russian firm Art Parquet. And what he said about his experience of applying for the visa was that the procedure is well balanced, clear and understandable. Any immigration minister who gets any letters praising the visa system reads them with tremendous interest, I can tell you. The entrepreneur visa also gave oil and gas company Canyon Oil and Gas the means to grow their company internationally by setting up in the UK. The company's energy specialist, who obtained a Tier 1 entrepreneur visa, said, "I'm very impressed with the Tier 1 visa, as well as the UK's business culture and work ethic." An interesting phrase, that last one. The company is focusing on markets in Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa and aims to expand once it acquires assets. I want to build on this by introducing a new route for international graduate entrepreneurs. That is to say, those international students who've engaged in supervised entrepreneurial activity during their university studies in the UK and who want to stay on after their studies to develop their ideas. I've asked the MAC to review the case for easing the resident labour market test requirement so that jobs for high earners do not need to be advertised here first. That would make it easier for employers to recruit the most economically valuable migrants to come here. We'll also improve the working of the system for some short-term business visitors and entertainers. Britain is one of the great artistic and creative centres of the world, and we do not want to be discouraging world-class performers from coming here. I'm aware that this has been a sore point in the arts world for some time, and we are taking action. The system does work well for most people. To take an example from the circus world, a British circus proprietor can issue a certificate of sponsorship, a work permit, in the morning for a Mexican juggler on an initial contract for 3 months, and then immediately send it electronically to the artiste, who can catch a plane that same day and enter the UK as a non-visa national without the need for a visa. It's a system, I'm told, that's not available anywhere else in the world, and it works because in this case, the management of the circus also assume their responsibilities in operating that system. Thus, I am looking at allowing some who are more akin to visitors than workers and who don't have regular sponsors to come through the visitor route rather than having to obtain sponsorship under the points-based system. We need to keep improving the functioning of the system for those who use it responsibly. So far, I've kept the framework of the migration system created by the last government and have focused on getting the detail right. Looking ahead, I want to retain the strong points of the system, such as sponsorship, but ensure that we can be more responsive and more flexible, both in saying yes and no in specific cases. We've added Taiwan to the list of countries with whom we have a youth mobility agreement, which allows young people to work here for up to 2 years, in return for the equivalent opportunities for young British people. This scheme has as its preconditions reciprocity in terms of scope and numbers in bilateral agreements and selectivity. It's limited to low-risk, non-visa national countries with which we have an effective returns agreement. And it replaced the shambolic and non-selective working holidaymaker scheme, which attracted such levels of abuse, it had to be suspended in several countries. And I'm also keen to develop the use of government-approved exchange schemes, which are tailored to specific circumstances. They enable temporary work, usually for schemes where there's a training or work experience or cultural dimension, which doesn't affect our domestic labour market. Examples are the UK-US Fulbright Teacher Exchange Programme, sponsored by the British Council, or the Medical Training Initiative, organised by the Academy of Medical Royal Colleges. I mentioned earlier the closure of the post-study work route. A Tier 5 GAE scheme, or one of these government-approved exchange schemes, potentially offers a smart alternative for trainee professionals. The onus is on the professional body to take the initiative in setting up a scheme and sponsoring the trainees. And again, I'm keen to encourage the active involvement in the migration system of those bodies that stand to gain by it, an element of self-regulation rather than relying on the Home Office to take all the responsibility. All of these are examples of how the migration system can select those who will be the dynamic agents of economic growth in our country. This selective approach is the right one for employers, migrants and Britain because it's sustainable, it helps integration and it complements the resident labour market rather than replacing it. And that's how we're becoming more selective on the work route. But the biggest immigration route is the student route. We are now on the way to eliminating the abuse created by the laxity of the old system. There is still some way to go on that, I'm aware, and we need to keep our changes under review. For example, I'm watching closely the developments in the Australian student visa system. They have just strengthened their migrant credibility test, a feature which is not present in ours. And I'm keen to focus not just on the inflow of students, but also their departure. Reinforcing the notion that study is for a limited period, extensions are for those who progress academically, and post-study work for those who will really contribute. Improving the outflows of students at the end of their course will not just reduce the net migration gap, but will also reinforce the benefits of circular migration by sharing the benefits of UK education with the countries where the migrants came from. But on a wider level, the debate about student migration needs to move on. It has been a polarised one, with the drive to stop bogus colleges and bogus students on the one hand, and a desire to expand international student numbers for the greater economic good on the other. Somewhere in between, there is a discussion to be had about the legitimate students coming here. Of course, international students bring economic and wider benefits, but as the MAC said in their recent report on impacts, there is scope for further examination of whether and to what extent foreign student tuition fees boost the UK economy, and crucially, how UK residents ultimately benefit from that. We need a better understanding of the economic and social costs and benefits of student migration, from the point of view of the wider UK economy, the education sector itself, and the students themselves. There needs to be a focus on quality rather than quantity. The principle of selectivity should apply to student migration just as it does to work migration. And we've seen in recent years a number of high-profile court cases in which people have been allowed to stay here by asserting rights under Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights, the right to family life. Many of these rights, at least in the form in which they've been given expression through the case law, are not recognised as such by the bulk of the population. And that leads to the ridiculous and damaging situation where the whole concept of human rights is called into question. That's not healthy for anyone. It's also dangerous for there to be a long-term standoff between Parliament and judges, which is why we want to give Parliament better parliamentary guidance on what should be considered in these kind of cases in future. I want to do what I can to avoid any obvious mismatch between immigration rules on the one hand and the interpretation of human rights legislation on the other. When we bring forward the new rules on family migration, which I referred to earlier, they will set out to Parliament the government's view on how the balance between individual rights and the public interest should be struck. That means the rules will reflect how the conditions we set for entry and the right to remain are in our view proportionate and therefore consistent with Article 8 entitlements. This means the rules will mean what they say, and we, the applicants and the public, will be clear about who is entitled to be here, on what conditions and why. This selective approach will also be relevant to the way we develop our border security, our visa system, and the services we offer tourists and business visitors in the future. If we want the brightest and best, and we do, then we must make the process comfortable and welcoming for them. Both our policies and the practices of the UK Border Agency must become as smart, selective and tailored as we can make them. Our first priority has been and remains to get the system back under control, to get the numbers down and to keep them down. We have laid the foundations for a sustainable system. Now we need to shape it to make it work for Britain. The main point I make today is that everyone who comes here must be selected to make a positive contribution. That is at the heart of our commitment to reduce net migration. We've talked in the past about a points-based system. In the future, it will be more accurate to talk about a contribution-based system. Whether you come here to work, study, or get married, we as a country are entitled to check that you will add to the quality of life in Britain. There are people who think that all immigrants are bad for Britain. Also people who think that all immigrants are good for Britain. To move the immigration debate onto a higher level, let's take it as read that they're both wrong, and that the legitimate question in today's world is how can we benefit from immigration? And my answer is that we are building as fast as we can an immigration system which is smarter, more selective and more responsive, an immigration system that delivers what Britain needs rather than what special interest groups demand. The change from the unregulated chaos of immigration policy in the past to this new vision will take some time to be fully visible, but we have taken significant steps already, and the announcements we'll be making shortly will be another part, important part, of the journey towards an immigration system in which the British people can have full confidence. Thank you very much.
To think about from that. Now, I think we have a little bit of time for question and answer. It's not particularly long. If you'd like to put your hand up, also say who you are and where you're from, that would be very helpful. If we can start as maybe in the middle of the group here, we might take questions, if it's okay, we might take questions in groups of 2.
Sorry, before we start questions, I should say that if they're really difficult, I'm going to refer to Glyn Williams, who's one of my senior officials at the British.
Thank you, Carol Walker from the BBC. Confirm then that in future the policy will be if you want to bring in a spouse from abroad, you've got to be earning more than £25,700, which rules out about half the country. And also that there's going to be this, if you come here and you want to stay, you're going to have to be earning considerably more, maybe £31,000. And isn't a ruling like that inevitably going to lead to the sorts of challenges to the Human Rights Act which you mentioned?
Well, a challenge to the Human Rights Act that said it's my human right if I've got no right to live in Britain would be slightly perverse. There's a right to a family life, but if you're coming from abroad, then that's where your family is. So actually, I don't think the Article 8 of human rights stuff is particularly relevant to that. You are the way I would expect of a high-class journalist asking me to reveal details of the policy we're going to announce in a few weeks' time, and I will refrain from doing that. But absolutely, I can confirm the principle is that what we don't want is people who come here, who are coming here to get married, to come here with the expectation that they can be living off benefits from day one. The household will have to rely on benefits to survive, because I don't think people in this country would think that's remotely fair, that you can come here and live off money provided by the taxpayer from the moment you arrive, and indeed in the expectation that you would do that. That doesn't seem to me to be a fair system at all.
You haven't accepted those figures yet?
Well, we're going to make the announcements over the coming weeks. Those are figures from the map that we have been told are the appropriate range we should be looking at for those two different types of immigration.
Let's take 2 questions together. There's a gentleman just behind the camera, and then another one on just by the wall.
Thank you. Imran Khan, the Campaign for Science and Engineering. Just want to start off by thanking you, actually. I think the science community has a lot of concerns that much of the way policy is formulated relies on the idea that people's value is inherently based on their salary, when in actual fact in the science and engineering sector that doesn't hold true. You have very talented people who perhaps know less than their skills might suggest. And we found that both UKDA and HOMOX have been really engaging on that front and change policy to suit. So we hope that will continue to be the case when it comes to assessments announcement in a few weeks' time. But I wanted to focus on exceptional talent, because although you did raise some good examples of how it's been working in practice, I think we know that the overall numbers are nowhere near what we'd like to bring in. And I do wonder whether that's partly because the fees required to apply for visas. I think they're £800 per person and a further £800 per family member as well. So you're looking at upwards of £2,000 for a reasonable application. Although these people are exceptionally talented, they're often not exceptionally rich. And I wonder if that might be something that's hindering the real sector of people coming into the UK.
So fees for visas, and the other question was just from the gentleman just behind this camera here.
Minister, Alan Macklin, currently CHRM Hill and most recently the MOD's Project and Programme Management Skills Champion. Can I come from the directly opposite position? And first of all say thank you very much indeed. That's almost the first time I've heard a minister stand up and talk from a much higher level and present the policy in terms of the benefits that we're chasing, rather than down to the minutiae of the detail of the implementation. My question to you, picking up on the background experiences of how well the Olympics and the London Eye have been delivered by the private sector, and compare that with the O2 arena, which is done entirely publicly, have you considered ways of getting commercial leverage in to deliver the policy, something that we tend not to be very good at in the UK, rather than developing the policy, which seemed, what you said today, seems to be laying the grounds for a huge success?
Well, thank you for both those questions and for the kind remarks that preceded them. Again, just as with nice lessons about visas, immigration ministers take kind remarks where they can, because they're not very common. The exceptional talent, I completely agree. We would like to have seen more people coming through, and the honest answer to are the visa fees a significant part of why it's been slow to start is I don't know, and I suspect none of us knows yet, because we haven't looked. It is a completely new policy. Doing it the way we're doing it, we're getting bodies to endorse the individuals. It's asking those individual bodies to do something they've never done before, and I think there are probably a number of reasons why we're finding it running at a slightly lower level than we all thought it would. But for that very reason, we're looking at everything that plays into that. And as time goes on, we will clearly refine and tweak the policy so that we do, as I say, not just get our fair share, but hopefully more than our fair share of these exceptionally talented people. So we're keeping that under review. In terms of the delivery of policy and outsourcing, if you like, of using private sector skills, of course we do that in certain very significant parts of the immigration world, the UKBA detention estate, and among the other things that I'm responsible for is a detention estate that detains about 4,000 people at any one time. That's quite significantly run by the private sector, and other things like removals. When we escort people, when we remove them from the country and they need escorting on the plane, that's done by other bodies. So as you would expect, I am in no way averse to using private sector skills, and the more we can, if we think we can provide a service better and more efficiently and more effectively by using private sector skills, then absolutely we're up for that, and I would expect that to develop in the years to come.
Maybe just a couple more questions. The gentleman in the second to back row, and then there's a lady just behind the door.
Andrew Green, Migration Watch. Thank you for that masterly summary, if I may say so. I thought the most interesting sentence that you was towards the end, where you said that you wanted to focus on what Britain needs and not on what special interest groups demand. I think that is a completely new approach. Clearly, special interest groups have to be accommodated, but it's very, very welcome to hear the wider interest put first.
And
there's a lady just behind the door as well, and I think that might be all we have time for, I think.
Head of URS Engineering and Energy Global, and wanted to focus on the gap between the policy and the practice, where for a global energy, particularly nuclear, the policy on reaching out to all the skills of the earth is absolutely essential and seems to us to be going with the grain and is right. The practice has two hiccups, it seems to us. One is the perception. And there are many people in many important parts of the world who think it's much harder than in practice it ought to be to actually move. And the second is the practice when you have a European footprint, which involves the UK and Germany or Belgium, and the problem of moving people between one and another. And it seems to me that the FCO needs to be talked with an awful lot more from your end, and the messaging needs to be got right, and an intercollegiate approach, rather than a Schengen approach, to Europe, so that in practice, first-class skills can move around much more freely within companies, because they're skills that we desperately need for our competitiveness.
One last, there's a lady in the second row in the black as well, stay that as well, and then everything done.
I'm Helen Clues from British Council. I agree that the immigration system needs to be comfortable and welcoming to visitors. In light of all the Tier 4 and Tier 5 changes, do you think that there is any need anymore to have police registration for the hundreds of thousands of international students who have to register with the police within 7 days of arrival, when they already have sponsors now looking and checking on their status? The last time this was reviewed was 1998.
Okay, let me, oddly enough, I think the first two flow together. I mean, thank you for your comments, particularly saying that we shouldn't focus on what interest groups want. Coming from a pressure group, that's quite a brave statement. I thought. Yeah, exactly. I approached that. I'm teasing. Indeed, I mean, all ministers in all departments get lobbied all the time, so you have to try and take a view that's not just giving in to lobbies, if you like, while listening at the same time. Striking that balance is one of the things ministers get paid for. But in the end, you have to try and take a wider view of the national interest, and that I think feeds very much directly into your question about how we actually organise the nuts and bolts of the systems. What I've been talking about today is trying to make it easier for talent to come here. I mean, I think the root of your problem, as you describe it, is that we're not part of the Schengen system. So, if you want to move, if you're not an EEA citizen and you want to move from Germany to the UK, then you need another visa, because the Schengen visa is something different. There are various ways we could solve that. We could join the Schengen system. We're not going to do that for all the obvious reasons. So what we can do is make sure that in applying for a company, applying to bring in a skilled and necessary worker, that the system is as quick and simple as possible, and that hopefully you, particularly if you're a company that does it a lot, that you will in effect have a sort of account handler type relationship with somebody at the UKBA. I'm very conscious of that kind of customer service, and we are trying to improve that. But if there are things that are going wrong, there are specifics, do let us know, because quite often I find that the last one I'll make about this, your point about perception is exactly right. A lot of the perception is quite frustrating from where I stand, because I, as immigration minister, make speeches saying Britain is open for business, and then pick up newspapers and often find actually business interest groups saying it's appalling, it's impossible to bring skilled workers to Britain. And we ask them, well, what's the problem? And often the problem dissolves or was one individual case and people are going on anecdotal evidence. But once you've said that to an international journal or on a website, then it's gone around the world. So it requires sense and restraint on all sides, I think. The need for police registration.
Yeah, to be honest, it's not something that I've personally focused on or has been raised with us. It sounds to me like something we ought to take away and think about. If that is in fact grit in the system, maybe it's something we could look at deregulating. I say that without, I'm sure there's somebody in UKBA who knows all the history of this better than me.
I know it. I raised it with the last minister, but didn't have time to deal with it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, as with Glyn, that's the first time I've ever had that brought up as a potential problem in the system. But as I say, if people bring problems to us, we'll go away and look at them and see if there is actually a good reason. And if there isn't, then we'll stop doing it.
Fred, speaking of running out of time, we are now out of time. You've all asked brilliant questions, and Damian, your lecture I think is incredibly interesting. You have, I think, genuinely opened a new chapter in this whole debate. So it only really remains for us to thank you and give Thank you so much.